boy didn't scream. He couldn't. But his mouth opened in a wide, silent O as he collapsed onto the marble steps of the Cabello estate, his small hands clawing at his right ear. The mid-morning sun gleamed off the glass towers behind him, throwing sharp reflections onto his pale face. Xavier Cabello, 10 years old, heir to one of the largest real estate fortunes in the Western Hemisphere, had known only silence since the moment he was born. But now his body trembled, his expression contorted into something worse than confusion, pain. Beside him, Amelia James dropped the silver tray she'd been carrying. The crash of cutlery echoed across the manicured courtyard. She rushed to him, her maid's apron flaring as she knelt, dark fingers reaching with careful urgency toward the boy's ear. "Xavier," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't respond. "What's hurting you?" His eyes fluttered. His mouth moved like it wanted to form a word, but didn't know how. And then she saw it just inside his ear canal. Something moving. Black. Vet. Alive. A high-pitched whine of panic echoed through the courtyard, heels on stone. The doors of the mansion burst open. Andre Cabello, steel-eyed and immaculate in a burgundy suit, stormed out, his polished shoes clapping like gunfire against the stone. His voice thundered before he even reached them. "What are you doing to my son?" His presence made the staff freeze. The gardener turned away. The house manager held her breath. But Amelia didn't move. She stayed crouched beside Xavier, her hand trembling now as she slowly withdrew the small, wriggling organism from the boy's ear. It clung for a moment, then released, slick and glistening in her fingers. Andre's steps halted, his breath caught in his throat. Xavier's body went still. His eyes opened. He looked not at Amelia, but up at the towering figure of his father. And then he whispered, "Papa." The word was soft, imperfect, a fragile sound, almost swallowed by the wind, but unmistakable. Andre's eyes widened. His mouth parted, but no words came. The world seemed to stop. The rustle of leaves, the ripple of the courtyard fountain, the murmurs of staff in the distance. Before we continue this thrilling story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. They said money could buy everything, until the one thing he couldn't buy began to speak. 2 days earlier, the Cabello mansion was its usual portrait of precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the ocean beyond. Hallways shined so brightly they looked like glass. The air conditioning was calibrated to within half a degree. The AI-controlled lighting shifted with the sun's position. And yet, inside, there was a silence no technology could fix. Xavier wandered the east wing with slow, measured steps. His world had always been quiet, but lately it felt heavier. He pressed his ear to the window pane and stared at the hummingbirds flitting around the garden, the way they hovered and darted, dancing to a rhythm he couldn't hear. He did this every morning, every night, hoping, without knowing he was hoping, that one day something would change. Andre Cabello, his father, spent most of his time in the West Wing. Office, gym, conference room, terrace. A man of metrics and measurements. He had spent over $42 million in the last 7 years trying to cure his son's deafness. Implants, stimulation therapy, neural mapping, AI-generated auditory reconstruction. None of it worked. Andre built towers across Miami, penthouses in Dubai, beachfront resorts in Spain. He broke ground on a skyscraper in Seoul while receiving updates about Xavier's failed fourth procedure in Zurich. He was always moving, always fixing, but not here, not in this house. The staff knew better than to disturb him. The child was cared for, monitored, safe, but unseen, until Amelia James arrived. She had been hired without fanfare, a temporary placement from a high-end domestic agency. Her paperwork was perfect, her references sterling, but no one asked about the quiet energy she carried, the way she paused before speaking, the way she noticed things. On her second day, she found Xavier sitting in the kitchen alone, his hands flat on the stone countertop. She hummed while putting dishes away, a soft, wordless tune her grandmother used to sing. She didn't know he was there until she turned. He was watching her. He didn't look away. That night, she studied him from across the hall as he rubbed his ear, wincing faintly. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but something in her chest tightened. A feeling she hadn't known in years. This child is in pain. And no one had seen it. Not the nurses. Not the tutors. Not the man with all the money in the world. Only her. The house was spotless. The systems humming. But Xavier's silence was never about just sound. It was about being unheard. Until now. And 2 days later, the silence would be broken. Not by a machine. Not by a surgeon. But by a woman the world never saw. Andre Cabello built his empire on silence. Not the natural kind, but the curated kind. The engineered stillness of triple-insulated penthouses, the whisper-quiet elevators in his Dubai towers, the soundproof boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were closed without so much as a raised voice. His life operated on precision. Every second accounted for, every action optimized. His phone buzzed with calendar alerts more than conversations. The click of an email being sent gave him more satisfaction than any human voice. Control wasn't just a preference, it was a religion. The Cabello Group had developments on 5 continents. Miami, Seoul, Abu Dhabi, Lisbon. Towers of glass and steel, identical in aesthetic and execution. They rose like monuments to his genius. He called them instruments of clarity. Investors called them visionary. Staff called them cold. At the center of it all was the Cabello estate, his private fortress perched above Biscayne Bay. A sprawling mansion of white marble and blue glass, managed by AI systems that track temperature, moisture, even mood lighting. He designed it after one of his earliest skyscrapers. It felt like a building, not a home. And inside, behind the touch screens and silent halls, lived a boy Andre couldn't reach. Xavier Cabello had been born on a rainy night in Zurich, delivered by emergency C-section after his mother collapsed in the 8th month. She never woke up. Andre had named the child after her grandfather, a kind man who once taught him that love was what you do in silence, not what you say aloud. At the time, he thought it poetic. Now it felt like prophecy. The doctors were calm at first. Delayed auditory response. Possibly fluid in the middle ear. Then the words changed. Profound bilateral hearing loss. Irreversible. Neurological origin. Andre didn't accept limits. He fired teams. Flew across continents. He sat in silent clinics, watching strangers wire sensors to his son's head. He signed off on trials, on surgeries, on neural mapping algorithms. He built a private wing of a Boston lab just for Xavier's case. Nothing changed. Eventually, the experts said, "You need to prepare for a life of silence." He couldn't. So he did what he always did when things broke. He removed himself. He replaced doctors with technology, tutors with custom AI assistants, nurses with discrete biometric monitors. The boy had a routine, nutrition, supervision. And yet, something was missing. Warmth. The house was quiet, but never peaceful. It was organized, but never soft. It was safe, but never loving. The staff whispered when Andre passed. The master built palaces across continents, but never a home. No one said it to his face, of course. No one said anything that wasn't useful. Efficiency was the language of the Cabello estate. Smiles were unnecessary. Conversation was minimized, which is why no one noticed the new housekeeper until it was too late. Her name was Amelia James. She arrived without fanfare, a 1-week contract from a luxury staffing agency. Originally from Ghana, she had a modest resume. Former caregiver, occasional nurse's aide, fluent in 3 languages, a decade of experience in domestic roles. She was soft-spoken, precise, unremarkable in the eyes of the estate's senior staff. But she had eyes that watched, not just to clean, but to notice, She noticed the way Xavier lingered by the glass doors, hands flat against the surface. The way he followed movement without reacting to sound. The way his shoulders flinched sometimes, like his body registered something his brain couldn't process. She noticed how no one really looked at the boy. They checked data, reported vitals, updated logs. But not one person knelt beside him. Not one person sat on the floor just to be with him. Until she did. The first time they crossed paths directly, he was sitting under the kitchen table. The robot vacuum had passed too close, and the boy had bolted without a sound. She found him curled against the leg of a stool, eyes wide, body tense. She didn't touch him, didn't speak. She just knelt and waited. After a moment, he looked at her. Their eyes met. He didn't run. Later, she would hum while folding linens. Nothing loud, just breath and rhythm, the kind of lullaby meant for herself more than anyone else. She didn't know Xavier was standing behind her, watching, listening in his own way. No chart would capture that. No biometric monitor would log the warmth in the air between them. In the days that followed, she began to see what no one else had dared question. Xavier wasn't just deaf. He was hurting. The kind of hurt that couldn't be cured by implants or clinics. The kind that comes from being unseen. Andre remained oblivious. He was in Dubai that week, touring the launch of a new resort. He FaceTimed his son each morning. Xavier never answered. The tutors handled lessons. The AI sent reminders. When Andre returned, the boy had a new look in his eyes. Not quite joy, not quite pain, but something was shifting. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet woman in the pressed black uniform had already seen what 1,000 experts had missed. And in less than 48 hours, she would do what none of them ever could. Amelia James moved like steam. Quiet, unassuming, present in every room without leaving a trace. Her apron stayed pressed. Her shoes never echoed on the marble. She knew which corners collected dust and which glass panels shimmered differently, depending on the time of day. To the other staff, she was the new girl. The name rarely left their lips without a shrug. Temporary help, just filling in. She wasn't invited to break room gossip or offered tours of the mansion's restricted wings. The senior butler once corrected her on how to fold hand towels, though her way was neater. No one asked where she was from. No one asked what she saw. But Xavier did. He watched her. He never spoke. Of course, no one expected him to. But he observed her the way only a child accustomed to silence can observe. Fully, quietly, with every sense honed like an instinct. Sometimes he appeared in the background of her tasks. On the staircase, sitting motionless with his knees pulled to his chest. In the corner of the hall, half behind a sculpture. Not following her exactly. Listening. Not with ears, but with presence. He noticed how she hummed softly while washing dishes. Not a song, not even a melody, just a breathy vibration through the floor. Something alive. She never addressed him directly unless necessary. She didn't sign. She didn't attempt grand gestures. She simply included him in the spaces she occupied, like he belonged. And slowly, that began to matter. One afternoon, she was dusting the molding in the upstairs corridor near Xavier's studio. The sunlight slanted through the windows in long, amber lines. Her feather duster, loosely tucked under her elbow, slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a quiet thwop. Xavier flinched. Not subtly, sharply. His head jerked. His shoulders hunched. His breath caught. She froze mid-motion. It wasn't a reaction of confusion. It was recognition. He had heard it. But how? She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just let the dust settle in the quiet. He glanced at her, then away, as if unsure whether he'd revealed something he shouldn't have. His fingers hovered near his right ear, brushing it like it had betrayed him. Amelia's breath slowed. Her mind sharpened. A child with profound neurological deafness doesn't flinch at faint sounds, unless something was wrong, or something had changed. That night, after dinner had been served and the staff had thinned to a whisper, she found him again. He sat alone in the East Solarium, backlit by the dim lavender of the security lights outside. The room was cold despite its design. Xavier huddled on the edge of the window seat, his knees drawn up, one hand clamped over his ear. Emilia entered gently, without ceremony. She didn't announce herself or ask permission. She didn't need to. She approached slowly and crouched in front of him, hands folded in her lap. Her voice came low, careful. "You're hurting," she said, gesturing simply, pointing to her own ear and tilting her head. His eyes flicked to hers. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was the first time she saw fear in him. Not the fear of pain, but the fear of being alone with it. She raised her hand, then paused, offering it to him without touch. "May I?" He hesitated, then nodded again. Her fingers brushed his temple. His skin was warm, and there was a tension behind the ear that wasn't just emotional. A tightness, swelling. She moved her thumb gently beneath the lobe, feeling for any signs, an old instinct from long ago. And then she saw it. In the shadow, just inside the canal, darkness where there should be none. It wasn't wax. It wasn't inflammation. It was moving. A memory returned, sharp and vivid. Her mother leaning over a crying child back in Ghana, drawing out a squirming insect after a heavy rain. It had burrowed, hidden, evaded even trained doctors. But her mother had known. "Trust what doesn't look right," she used to say. Even silence can be swollen. Emilia's heart pounded. She pulled her hand away and looked Xavier in the eyes. "We'll fix this," she whispered. He didn't understand the words, not directly. But he understood her eyes, her calm. He nodded one more time, then leaned, slowly, into her touch. Not like a patient, like a child, seeking the one thing missing from every corner of the mansion. Someone who saw him. And in that moment, beneath the blinking glow of the AI-controlled security lights, Emilia James knew something no one else had seen in 10 years. Xavier Cabello was not unreachable. He was waiting. She had seen something like it before. Not in a clinic, not in a hospital, not beneath fluorescent lights or under the hum of machines, but on the floor of a mud brick home during the rainy season, when the river had overflown and the insects came up from the ground. Emilia was 13 the first time she held a screaming child steady while her mother leaned in with a matchstick and tweezers. The boy had thrashed, his ear leaking fluid, his cries like animal sounds. But her mother's hands never shook. She coaxed the intruder out with oil and patience and something else, an authority that made the impossible routine. Later that night, her mother said, "You don't always need machines to save someone. Just eyes that are willing to see and hands steady enough to act." Emilia never forgot that. Her mother had run the only clinic in their village. 2 rooms and a shed filled with donated supplies and handwritten records. She stitched wounds under candlelight, delivered babies under thunderstorms, treated snake bites with nothing but salt water and stubbornness. And Emilia helped. By 16, she could disinfect a gash, pack an abscess, and recognize infections before they spread. She'd grown up knowing the smell of illness, the color of pain. She wanted to become a nurse, to study properly, wear real scrubs, and carry a stethoscope with her name etched on the back. But then her mother died. A sudden fever. Too fast. Too final. There was no one left to run the clinic. The villagers tried, but the medicine spoiled, and eventually the doors closed. Emilia became the eldest caretaker of 4 younger siblings. Nursing school disappeared. The dream folded neatly beside her mother's photograph, tucked into a box of letters that still smelled of iodine and rain. She left Ghana at 22, passport trembling in her hand, and took domestic work in Europe, then the U.S. She cleaned for diplomats, served for executives, scrubbed the private corners of houses bigger than her entire village. But that instinct, the one that listened for pain instead of noise, never left her. And now it stirred again. The day after she found Xavier pressing his ear in the solarium, Emilia woke early. Earlier than usual. She stood outside his door for a full minute, just listening. No one else noticed that his footsteps had grown softer, that he rubbed his right side more than his left, that he'd stopped playing with his puzzle tiles and now sat for hours staring out windows with his hands balled in his lap. But she did. Over the next 2 days, she watched. Carefully, quietly. She saw the grimace he tried to hide when he bent over. She noticed how his balance was slightly off, how his head tilted just slightly as if countering pressure. The AI log showed nothing abnormal. No fever, no spike in heart rate, no alerts. But Xavier was in pain, and no one had seen it. No one except her. She asked for time off that afternoon, said she had a headache. But instead of resting, she pulled out a worn leather notebook, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were scribbles from her mother's clinic, old remedies, sketches, ear diagrams, notes written in the margin of torn medical guides. She read by the small light in the laundry room, flipping until she found the page. Foreign obstruction in canal, signs, disorientation, uneven hearing, persistent pain, sudden startle at vibration. Beneath that, her mother had written, check the ears. Always. Even when they say the child can't hear. Amelia closed the book, her chest tight. It wasn't certainty she felt. It was urgency. That quiet, familiar pull in her ribs, you have to do something. That night, she passed Xavier's room and paused. The door was cracked open. Inside, he sat cross-legged on the carpet, gently rocking. His hands were pressed to his temples. And for the first time, she felt it rise again. Not fear, not duty, purpose. The one that used to move through her as a girl, fetching water during emergencies, steadying the basin while her mother rinsed blood from a stranger's arm. The one that said, you were made for this. Not as a nurse, not as a doctor, but as someone who sees what others overlook. The next morning would be different. She could feel it. She just didn't know yet how loud silence could shatter when it finally breaks. The morning sun spilled across the Cabello estate like molten glass, coating the manicured hedges and polished stone with a light too clean, too perfect. The air smelled of sea salt and money. And in the middle of the garden, beneath the soft rush of the marble fountain, Xavier Cabello sat trembling. His right hand clutched his ear. His legs were folded awkwardly, like sitting upright had become too much. He rocked slightly, eyes glazed with the kind of pain that had no language. Amelia spotted him through the window, just as she was setting down a tray of linen napkins. Her pulse skipped. She didn't wait for permission. She dropped the tray and ran. The garden was silent except for the trickle of water and the whisper of her steps on stone. As she reached him, Xavier looked up, not startled, not afraid, relieved. She knelt quickly, brushing the hair from his damp forehead. It hurts. She signed the words slowly, clumsily, basic signs she had learned from a deaf coworker 2 jobs ago. Xavier Nudda. A single tear slid down his cheek. Her hands moved without thinking, brushing gently behind his ear, tilting his head. And there it was again, just inside the canal, shadow where there should be skin. Not wax, not scar tissue, something alive. It twitched. Her breath caught. Her mind reeled back to the boy in Ghana, the matchstick, the trembling. Her mother's voice. Trust what doesn't look right. I won't hurt you, she whispered. Trust me. He didn't pull away. Her fingers moved with a memory that never left her. Steady, sure, deliberate. She pressed gently just behind the ear, coaxing. Her left hand braced his jaw. Her right hand reached in her pocket where she always kept a small pair of tweezers. The habit of someone who had once saved children with nothing more than instinct and metal. She leaned close. The sunlight shifted just right. And then movement. The thing inside wriggled. She caught it, just as she began to pull. What in God's name are you doing? The voice shattered the air like breaking crystal. Andre Cabello stormed out through the glass doors, phone still in hand, suit jacket unbuttoned, fury cutting through the morning peace like a blade. Behind him, a security guard followed at a cautious pace. Step away from my son. He crossed the courtyard in seconds, face red, jaw clenched. You dare touch my child? Are you insane? He reached down, pulling Xavier toward him. The boy whimpered, barely but enough. Emilia didn't flinch. She rose slowly, carefully, keeping her palm open. He was in pain, she said quietly. I don't care what you think you saw, Andre snapped. Who do you think you are, laying hands on? Papa. The word cut the world in half. Andre froze. The guard stopped. Even the fountain seemed to hold its breath. Xavier stood between them, his hands still half raised, eyes wide, not frightened, but awake in a way he had never been before. Papa, he said again. Not loud, not perfect, but real. Andre's mouth fell open. He stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Emilia lowered her hand. Inside her palm, writhing slowly in the sunlight, was a small, wet, black larva. Alive. It glistened. Andre staggered back a step. His phone slipped from his fingers and landed on the stone with a crack. No one moved. And for the first time in 10 years, the Cabello estate was silent in a way that wasn't empty. It was holy, because the boy who never spoke had spoken, because the woman no one saw had just done the impossible. For a moment, no one moved. Xavier stood between them, blinking in the sunlight, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The word he'd spoken, Papa, still hung in the air like a spell, unraveling every assumption that had ever been made about him. Then chaos. The security guard's radio crackled. Staff rushed from the doors. The estate's head physician, called by a silent alarm triggered the moment Andre yelled, was already sprinting across the courtyard. Emilia stayed still. The larva in her palm continued to writhe, its slick black body catching the morning light like a thing from a nightmare. Andre, pale now, knelt beside his son. He touched Xavier's face like it might disappear. Did you say something? He whispered. Xavier stared at him, then nodded. The movement was clumsy, but certain. Again, Andre said, voice cracking. Please, Xavier azitata. Then softly, Papa. Andre broke. Not loudly. No wails or sobs. Just the collapse of a man who had spent a decade building walls of glass, only to be undone by one word. Within the hour, 2 private doctors arrived by helicopter. Xavier was rushed into the lower-level clinic. He didn't resist. He didn't need to. For once, he wasn't a patient to be managed. He was the miracle no one could explain. Security escorted Emilia from the garden, not with aggression, but with caution. They didn't cuff her, didn't shout, just gently urged her to wait outside. She sat alone beneath the shade of a royal palm, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The larva had been sealed in a sterile container. Her uniform was stained with soil and sweat. No one told her what would happen next. Inside, the medical team examined Xavier. Brain scans, audiometry tests, neural response measurements. Every result pointed to the same impossible truth. He was hearing, not faint echoes, not imagined sound, real, measurable hearing. The obstruction, a rare Ochmeromia senegalensis larva, had likely been inside his auditory canal for years. A slow-growing parasite, alive, undetectable, positioned just enough to disrupt vibration. How did no one see this? One doctor muttered, shaking his head. Another whispered, because we weren't looking for something so simple. They couldn't explain why the larva had gone undetected by imaging, or why, after all the tech and surgeries, the cure had been something so human. Meanwhile, Andre stood behind the glass wall of the clinic, watching his son respond to sound. A clap, a bell, a whisper. Each time, Xavier turned toward it, slow, cautious, as if unsure the world was finally speaking to him. Andre pressed his forehead to the glass. He saw his own reflection, and he saw the boy who had waited 10 years in silence for someone to notice what none of his billions could fix. All that money, he murmured, voice thin and breaking, and all it took was someone who cared enough to look. He found Amelia exactly where he expected her, still beneath the palm tree, still silent, still waiting. She didn't rise when he approached. She didn't make excuses. I didn't mean to frighten him, she said quietly. Were you? You didn't, he replied. You opened something. He stood awkwardly for a moment, hands in his pockets. The weight of 100 meetings, surgeries, contracts, and failures seemed to pull his shoulders forward. Then he sat beside her, not like a CEO, not like a billionaire, just a father. I haven't thanked anyone in years, he said. She looked over at him, surprised. He nodded. I forgot how. They sat in silence, true silence, not the kind built by money, but the kind that comes only when nothing more needs to be said. At last, Andre asked, How did you know? Amelia's answer was simple. I've seen that pain before. Back home. She looked toward the garden where Xavier had sat that morning. It doesn't take much to miss a child's voice, she said, especially when they're not allowed to have one. Andre solut. The wind moved through the palm, leaves like a whisper. And for the first time since his wife died, he felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not grief, humility. He stood. I don't know what happens next, he said, but I hope you'll stay. She looked at him, measured his words, then gave a single nod. And in that moment, something shifted, not in the mansion, not in the world, but in him. A man who had spent a decade trying to buy back what he lost had finally listened to the only thing that couldn't be purchased. The story exploded before the sun rose the next morning. At first, it was just a whisper, one leaked message from a junior nurse to a cousin with a blog. Then a headline. Then 20. Où skipper cure millionnaires div sont. Billions failed, one woman succeeds. The miracle at Cabello Estate. By noon, satellite vans lined the private drive. Paparazzi climbed the garden walls. Helicopters buzzed over Biscayne Bay. News anchors speculated live. Was it real? A hoax? A cover-up for an undisclosed surgery? The medical world recoiled. Audiologists fumed. Specialists denounced it as a statistical anomaly. Some tried to discredit Amelia, unlicensed, untrained, unvetted. But none could deny what Xavier now did on camera. He turned when called. He pointed to music. He laughed when Amelia hummed. He heard, and that truth, undeniable, miraculous, ignited a fire across the country. Andre watched it unfold from behind dark glass in his study. Screens showed talking heads dissecting every frame of Xavier's medical charts. On another wall, a security feed tracked Amelia's quiet movements through the house. She had returned to folding sheets. The board called at 3:42 p.m. sharp. They didn't waste time. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Said Martin Lang, head of investor relations. I do, Andre said. You made us look like fools, snapped another voice. The Cabello brand represents precision, credibility. You've turned it into a circus. Andre remained quiet. Martin continued, voice rising. Do you know how many partners pulled out of the Soul project this morning? Do you know what your little stunt cost us in medical real estate? Andre looked down at the desk. His son's crayon drawing lay there, half finished. A house with an open door and crooked sun. Martin, Andre said softly, tell me something. A pause. If you had a child in pain for 10 years, and someone healed him, would you care what title they held? Silence. That's not the point. No, Andre cut in, sharper now. That's exactly the point. Maybe it's time Cabello means something more than clean glass and vertical profits. The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. It was supposed to be in the estate's tech auditorium, polished screens, branded signage, minimal exposure. Andre moved it to the garden. No stage, no podium. Just a long white cloth table under the banyan trees, surrounded by reporters. The same place where Xavier had whispered Papa. Amelia stood off to the side in her uniform, uncertain, eyes down. Andre stepped forward. No suit, just an open-collared shirt and tired eyes. The microphones hissed. Cameras clicked. I've been called many things in my life, he began. Developer, Visionary. Control freak. Billionaire. He looked out at the sea of press. But none of that could give my son what he needed. He took a breath. I built towers. Designed cities. I could move a mountain with a phone call. But I couldn't hear my son speak. Not once. Until this week. He turned slightly, gesturing to Amelia. A woman I didn't see, who most of us never would have seen, gave him something no one else could. Not with money. Not with machines. With care. He paused. The wind rustled through the trees. She's the reason my son can hear the wind. Gasps murmured through the crowd. Some reporters lowered their cameras. She didn't ask for a paycheck. She didn't wait for permission. She saw pain and acted. That to me is medicine. That to me is humanity. He stepped back. So, if any of you came here looking for a press spin or a corporate quote, leave. This isn't about the Cabello name anymore. The applause that followed was uneven. Some clapped, some stood frozen. But the moment was real. Later, in the privacy of his study, Martin Lang called again. You really want to die on this hill? Andre looked out the window. Amelia and Xavier were sitting by the fountain. He was teaching her how to snap. Badly. She laughed, soft and unguarded. If this is the hill, Andre said, then yes. I'll die on it. And with that, the awakening began, not just in his house, but in him. The empire of glass finally cracked. And through that crack, weeks passed, and the media storm settled into a steady hum. The world moved on to its next scandal, its next miracle. But inside the Cabello estate, something had taken root. Not spectacle, not science. Change. In the corner of the mansion where blueprints once covered the walls, a different kind of design unfolded. Drafts for a foundation built not from concrete or glass, but purpose. They called it the Xavier Cabello Foundation for Compassionate Care. The mission was simple. Bring basic medical screenings and early intervention to the children who had always been ignored. Those in rural towns, forgotten neighborhoods, refugee camps, and clinics without power. No parent would have to cross oceans. No child would wait 10 years for someone to see their pain. And at the center of it all was Amelia James. Andre offered her any title she wanted. So, director, partner. She asked for none. I'll work, she said, if I can do it my way. Her way meant no white coats, no waiting lists, no walls between the patient and the person. She visited schools and slums, churches and shipping containers. She carried a red satchel with cotton swabs, a flashlight, and a binder of referrals written in 6 languages. She spoke softly, but when she did speak, people listened. At the first press briefing, a journalist asked her what she thought about becoming a miracle worker. She shook her head. Not all miracles mean fixing what's broken, she said. Some mean accepting what's beautiful. That quote went viral. Printed on t-shirts. Spray painted on the side of a hospital van in the Bronx. Back at the estate, Xavier adjusted to sound like a child learning to walk on unfamiliar ground. He flinched at sudden noises. The blender made him cry. The ticking of the grandfather clock gave him headaches. Rainstorms left him curled beneath blankets with his hands pressed to his ears. He began speech therapy with a warm-eyed woman named Rosa, who used puppets and rhythm games. But his real teacher was Amelia. She never pushed him. She never asked for words. Instead, she taught him how to listen. Not with ears, but with his body. They started with the piano bench. Each afternoon, they sat side by side, hands flat on the keys, not to play, but to feel. Don't listen for the sound, she said. Listen for the shake in your palms, the echo in your ribs. She tapped a slow rhythm. Thumb, pause, pause, thumb. Xavier copied her, unevenly at first. But soon he found it, a beat. Then another. Then a pattern. They clapped. They hummed. They drummed with wooden spoons on soup pots. Andre watched from the doorway one evening, his tie loosened, his phone forgotten in his pocket. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Amelia caught his eye, then looked back to the boy. Xavier tapped twice, then turned to her with a wide grin. Again, he said. One word. Not rehearsed. Not coaxed. Just joy. And for the first time since the house was built, the Cabello mansion had sound. Not the sterile kind. Not alarms or AI chimes. Life. Real, imperfect human sound. And the man who had once ruled a kingdom of glass stood in its center, no longer afraid of the cracks. 1 year later, beneath chandeliers shaped like stars and walls lined with donors and dignitaries, a small boy in a navy suit stepped onto the stage. He didn't walk quickly. He wasn't carried. He made his way with his own legs, small and steady, his back straight though his hands trembled. A hush settled over the gala ballroom. The annual Compassionate Care Summit had hosted presidents and royalty, but no one watched the stage quite like they did now. Xavier Cabello, once the boy who had never spoken a word, now stood before hundreds. He paused at the microphone, swallowed. His fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Then he spoke. "Miss Amelia," he said, his voice soft but clear, every syllable deliberate, shaped by both silence and effort. "She taught me to listen before I ever heard." A breath caught in the room. "She gave me more than sound," he continued. "She gave me courage." The audience rose. Applause filled the hall like a wave breaking all at once. Hands clapping, people crying, not out of sympathy but awe. In the front row, Amelia James stood very still, her arms crossed in front of her. She didn't blink for several seconds. Then, quietly, she smiled and wiped a tear from her cheek. Beside her, Andre Cabello sat with his hands folded, his face slack with pride and something deeper. Gratitude, reverence, a humility learned only through loss and miracle. Later that night, long after the speeches and the standing ovations and the photographs, Andre found Amelia alone on the balcony of the hotel. The city glowed beneath them. Wind stirred her curls. He stepped up beside her. "You didn't just heal my son," he said. "You healed me." Amelia didn't look at him at first. She stared at the skyline, hands resting on the stone rail. Then she turned. "No, sir," she said softly. "Your son healed you both." They stood there in silence. Not the cold silence that used to fill the Cabello mansion. A warmer one, shared. Back at the estate, the world had changed. Gone were the sterile hallways and echoing walls. The AI-controlled temperature remained, but now there were fingerprints on the windows. Laughter in the corridors. Music from the parlor. Xavier played piano now. He wasn't good, he didn't care. He played for rhythm, for the thrum in his bones. He chased the family dog across the garden. He painted loud, messy things in the art room. He asked questions, all the time. And Amelia stayed. Not as staff, not even as director of the foundation. She stayed as family. Some days she arranged flowers in the foyer, humming as she worked. Other days, she traveled to far-off towns, carrying stories and medicine and presents. Andre watched from the window as Xavier told a joke to the gardener and then tripped over his own feet, laughing so hard he couldn't get up. He smiled, not the smile of a tycoon in control, the smile of a man who finally understood what a home could be. And in the final beat of this story, as the camera slowly pulls away from the Cabello estate, the mansion once built to block the world out, we hear the narrator's voice once more. Sometimes the loudest miracles come from the quietest hearts.